It's nearing the end of the garden season, and I still have a load of fresh peppers, so I came out to pick some for this week's dinners. I decided to incorporate our three most abundant things on the homestead right now into this week's meals: beef, peppers, and tomatoes. Most of my tomatoes have been stored away in the freezer waiting to be processed. I haven't started canning them yet, so I made about a week's worth of tomato sauce here. Any leftover sauce will go back into the freezer. I simply dump them in pots, cook them down, toss them into the blender, and then continue to cook it all down until I like the taste and consistency. Using the blender eliminates the need for any peeling, which makes it really easy. On Sunday, I started with stuffed bell peppers. I wanted the peppers at their freshest for this, when they're still nice and sturdy, so I chose to make these first. I remove the tops and clean the peppers out. They get filled with onion, garlic, jalapeno, ground beef, and rice, and tomato sauce. And I also use what is essentially a taco seasoning in them, but these can be made a multitude of ways. With the rice, I just want it par cooked here before going into the peppers. If you fully cook it ahead of baking, it can tend to get mushy in the end product. So I just want it about halfway cooked. I add water into the pan or dish before covering. This is to help steam the peppers. Some people soften them before stuffing them, but I find it easier to stuff them and handle them when they are still raw and not hot. On Monday, I prepared a beef bolognese sauce with roasted red pepper as well as a cheesy garlic bread. I started by making a sauce with roasted red peppers and garlic. Roasted red peppers are a great way to incorporate a little bit of sweetness and added flavor into any recipe, really. While that was roasting, I started my bread dough. I don't typically follow a hard and fast recipe when I cook, except when I am baking. I have linked both of the bread recipes that I use in this video in the description. I will note that I halved the recipe for the French bread, and I tweaked it just a little bit to my liking, but it's a great recipe that I use all the time. I peeled the peppers a bit here, but it isn't really necessary if you are blending them up. And I added half of the roasted garlic, and I set the other half aside for my bread later. I also added just a small amount of tomato sauce here just to help everything blend up really easy. A simple egg wash here on the bread gives it a beautiful brown finish, so I usually go for that since we have plenty of eggs. The addition of red wine here is a great way to just enrich the flavor of the sauce. I just let it simmer down a bit and cook the alcohol out, and it gives it a great flavor. I mixed the remaining roasted garlic with butter and salt to top the French bread, and then I added mozzarella on top of that and popped it back in the oven. This meal is repeated quite often in our house because in a pinch we always have the core ingredients: ground beef, pasta, and tomatoes. I may not always make the bread or the roasted red peppers, but we always have those three things. On Tuesday, I went for the classic chili and cornbread. It's always a simple meal to throw together, and it is usually a crowd pleaser. All of the beef that I'm using in this video is coming from a cow that we had processed back in June and which now resides in our freezer. For the cornbread, I opted for a quick and easy store-bought mix. I do typically add an extra egg into it though. I made muffins this time since I am making two different kinds of cornbread here. I made the plain kind for my kids, and then I added jalapeno to the other half of the muffins. I do like to add a bit of canned or frozen corn to the chili right at the end. I personally think it gives it a great extra bit of texture and crunch. Then we just load up on any toppings we like and we're all set. On Wednesday, I made a beef stew with a rustic no-knead bread. I started with the bread dough. We love this bread a lot. It pairs so well with a soup or stew. It's crusty and crisp on the outside, soft and moist on the inside. For the stew, I cut up the beef and I toss it in flour and salt. The chunks then get browned and the flour helps create a thicker stew in the end. I braise the beef in red wine until it is tender and a thick gravy forms. The bread dough can be a bit sticky and messy, just FYI. And like I previously said, the recipe for the bread will be linked in the description. I don't typically add peppers to my stew, but I did want to incorporate some here, so I decided to make a very simple jalapeno compound butter to pair with the bread. This butter can be used in so many other ways. I love it when cooking eggs in the morning or something like searing some salmon. The options are really endless. I will admit the beef looks a bit unappetizing at this point, but this thick gravy was exactly what I wanted to see. Once everything is added together, it all simmers for a couple hours before it is truly finished and ready to eat. For the final meal, I made steak picado. I headed out to the garden to grab some unripe tomatoes for a fresh green tomato salsa. This salsa can be made a variety of ways, just like any salsa. I like to broil these tomatoes first. I was also going to add some cilantro into the mix, but when I went to grab it, I realized I was out. This will last about a week in the fridge, so I am not canning this. The picado comes together really fast, which is a great end to a week of cooking because by that point I'm a bit tired. I brown the meat in a very hot pan. Be sure not to overcook it here, just brown it on each side, or it can get a little bit tough in the end. And then I just add the tomato sauce and let it simmer a bit to marry the flavors. And I just serve this with some tortillas, a side of canned refried beans, and a little bit of avocado, just whatever you like. Thanks for watching.